Hi, everybody, and welcome to Thriving LDS Singles. We're so glad you could be with us today. Hi, Kim, my co-host. Hi, Kim.
Hello.
And today we have Barbara, and we're so excited to have Barbara as one of our guests. So she's one that we follow lots, and hopefully most of you know her. So hi, Barbara.
Hello, Kay and Kim. I just wish I were in Australia with you, but here we are.
It's so good in Australia.
I'm sure it is.
But I should stop bragging about my country. But I love it here. Brisbane's one of those towns that has, bright blue skies for winter, and it's just delightful. So
Someday, Kay, I'll be down there. I did go. I told you I did go to Sydney a few years ago, but I need to get to the other side, go to Brisbane and really enjoy it.
Yeah, Brisbane's beautiful. Anyway, for those who don't know Barbara, she's professor of church history and doctrine at Brigham Young University, and she focuses a lot on women in religious leadership, so we're going to do some talking to her about some of that. She's received a PhD in instructional psychology, I don't think I've heard of instructional psychology, but a master's degree in educational leadership and foundations with an emphasis in international education. So she's done lots of study, but the things we're going to talk to her about are her family and her life story. So she's married to Dustin Gardner, and they're parents of 2 children. She enjoys her wonderful family, learning, teaching, traveling, people, the great outdoors, and life, which is absolutely, yes.
But she also wrote a book that I love, which is, what's the exact title? Women in the Priesthood, or is that the title?
Priesthood Power of Women.
Okay, yes, thank you.
And the church, family, and temple, or the temple, church, and family. I can't remember.
All right, so important topics for us as singles, but I want to hear a bit about your story, because you've actually weren't married until, in the church, considered quite late. Yeah.
I married at 40. So I'm the 12th of 13 children, and it was interesting. I was blessed to see my older siblings get married in the temple, and it seemed like that's just what you did. You left for college, or you went on a mission, you got home, and you got married. And so I just kind of watched that happen, and expecting someday that I would have, my parents had 13 children. I thought I'd have 20. I thought I would have maybe 10 of my own, and then I would adopt one from every country that I could. And I would have this husband that was totally on board, and, Polynesian or something probably. Anyway, it didn't work that way. So I went to college. I went to BYU Hawaii and came back, went to BYU. I had a good experience, dated a little bit, went on my mission, came back, thought for sure that at that point, you get married. I did have some siblings that got married a little bit older. So I have a couple of sisters that got married at 18. I have a sister that got married at 34 or 35. I had a brother that got married at 38. So I had some other siblings. And one of the things I think I'm so grateful for with my parents is, and maybe it's because I was the 12th child, so they had enough experience with it. Marriage wasn't the culminating thing. It was following the Spirit that mattered to them. Whether in this life or the next, I think the emphasis was on that you will get married in this life or the next life. And in this life, you just do everything you can to follow the Spirit. And even though they say that, still I wanted to get married, and I kind of felt like that's what the church was teaching. I remember being a little bit defensive of it at times. I was serving as a stake young women's president, and the focus was on getting married. And there were a few times where I had to say, look, we need to make sure that every young woman here understands that regardless of marital status, they're just as important to the kingdom of God, and valued, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that was me. I finished my mission, came home, graduated from BYU, and then started a master's degree. I was taught seminary full time after that, and then started a PhD program, taught Institute for a while, went to Boston, where I continued to teach. I was the Institute director out in Boston. I was teaching at BYU for a while. I did some postdoctoral work at Harvard. And to be quite frank, I had opportunities to marry, but it just never felt right, ever. I remember, I shouldn't say, sometimes I feel badly for saying this, but I will say this. One time I was dating somebody pretty seriously. I received a blessing from my dad, and the blessing, it just said, this person is a distraction for what the Lord would really have you do right now. And, for everyone else, they thought my schooling was a distraction or my work was a distraction, but for the Lord, that dating situation was a distraction to my work and to my calling and to my profession and my education. So it was I felt like I wanted desperately to be married, and it wasn't the Lord's desire at that time, which frankly, since we're talking singles, I hope everybody understands that. That is one lesson I learned is I got married in the timing that the Lord wanted me to get married, or that was right for me and right for my husband. And had I married other people, which I could have, it would have been the wrong choice.
Yeah.
So
well,
it wasn't just marriage that's the right choice. It's marriage to the right person, the right time, right place, right?
And we often, yes, that's so true. We also often hear, I think almost Kay, in every interview we've done with somebody who hasn't been married, that they really have this strong testimony of the Lord telling them he has something else for them to work on and focus on, and that it would be a distraction. And they've all kind of said that. So I do think there's definitely something to that too.
Yeah,
But I think it's very important what you're saying is to emphasize that, because the young women's program does seem to focus on you have to get married, and so you feel like a failure, like you've messed the program up.
Yeah.
I hope that we are so sensitive to that. And I have heard people, recently I've been working on some statistics about marriage and singles and happiness in the church and things like that. And we were having this conversation and we were talking about single individuals in the church and why they aren't married and things. And there were all these different reasons people were giving. And I just said, could it possibly be that the Lord doesn't want them married yet? I mean, is it really that hard to believe? Because I know genuinely, I have zero question that's the case in my life. I prayed so often that I would be able to get married, but I really started just praying that I would be an instrument in the hands of the Lord and that I would just be able to be strong enough to do his will regardless of marital status. Once I turned it over to the Lord, there was so much more peace. When I was concerned about what everybody else thought and the culture of the church, it was really hard. When I turned it over to the Lord, it became so much easier. And from time to time, you turn it over to the Lord at different times. But when I was just like all in, like whether I get married in this life or I don't, great. Then there was just a level of peace and understanding and just walk in faith. And I loved my life. I loved being single. I genuinely did. Was I lonely at times? Absolutely. I was in Boston by myself and didn't know a human being when I was out there, not one soul. But I learned to have friends. I learned to get outside of myself and just trust in the Lord. But I planned on not being married. There was a time when I just put it all on the altar and just next life is great.
Yeah, and I have had that. I don't want to spend the rest of my life alone. I'm 60 and I don't want to be alone, but I've also had this, like I just got called to be the Relief Society president for my ward, and I'm thinking, can I do this alone? Is that, like I have these little fleeting thoughts. Is that who's trying to discourage me? But I think that I can focus better and I can serve the women, and I have a lot of compassion for all the hard things that they go through.
Kim, we just had my Relief Society president, my stake Relief Society president in our stake is a single woman in her 60s. Man, she is a slam dunk powerhouse woman like nobody's business. I mean, she has the respect of everyone in the ward, but more importantly, I mean, everyone in the stake, more importantly, the Lord. I mean, that girl nailed it. I mean, she nailed it. So I don't think marital status makes a difference. What matters is the Lord. If when the Lord calls, he qualifies regardless of marital status. I hope we really get that.
That's important. And I think that's what your book is talking about too, isn't it? The women in the priesthood. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
About my book?
Yeah, it's like where to start, huh?
Yeah, I think that was one of the, maybe that was probably an impetus to what part of it is. I don't know if this was intentional, but I think as single women, regardless of callings and jobs and everything, I don't just think this, I know this. God has a plan for every woman, every single woman, and every single woman has spiritual gifts and talents. We have a prophet that's been asking women of the church, especially recently, pleading, inviting, and urging the women of the church to understand their spiritual gifts and talents. And in the last part of the Doctrine and Covenants, it actually talks about priesthood gifts. And I've thought about that with women. And we have a prophet that's asking us to understand the priesthood and how to access priesthood power. And gosh, I learned early on, and again, I'm going to give this to my parents a lot. My dad especially, both of my parents were just such great people, but my dad, because of his maybe because of his calling when I was growing up, but also his sensitivity to women's issues and my being single, was very, very careful when he would come to my home. We had family activities all the time, and he would always make sure that everyone knew that I presided in my home. Everyone knew that the priesthood power that I had priesthood power in my home, regardless of being married, not being ordained to a priesthood office, but because I was endowed in the temple. And I appreciated a father who genuinely really got that and emphasized that. So there was no question for my family that marital status didn't matter. And I was very grateful to receive priesthood blessings from my father or from the home teacher, now from my husband. But I was confident, especially as I was older, and have a very strong testimony that we are endowed with priesthood power. And that's not a joke. That's not a fluffy. That is, we have the right, the ability, and the responsibility to call upon God's priesthood power to bless ourselves, to to be protected in our own homes, to have God's power with us, to call upon the angels to be among us in our own homes, but also to be blessing other family members and the ward, the neighborhood, the church. That's what this priesthood power is. And I remember spending some time with Ann Browdy. She's a religion professor at Harvard. I went there once with Sherry Dew, and the three of us, Sherry and I were single at the time. Ann Browdy was a woman who does research in religious women, and she made a comment, and she just said, for years, I don't have all the data with me, but she just said, for years the Lord has called upon his single women in various churches to be the ones who really influence and get the work done. They're often the backbone of the church society. And Sherry Dew was with me, and she was, I mean, I could just see it, like, here's Sherry. Like, here's a great example of a woman who was an absolute leader, who was single. And you could kind of see Sherry's eyes kind of lit up too. Like, the Lord uses single women in the church, in every church, in the Catholic church, in the Christian church, in the Jewish church. She was Jewish by faith. And she just said, I hope that as single women in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you understand how absolutely valuable you are, not just in a religious format, but in a church format, in an order type format, in a government type society. Anyway, it was very fascinating how important single women are in religion. So
I love
That
that.
is
And
fascinating.
I get it. One thing that I think is really interesting is interesting to me because it's my story, but hopefully it's interesting to somebody else. But I often say here, because I was raised by a feminist mom, it was never a thought that I would be a stay-at-home mom or anything. I was raised thinking I would always have a career, and I worked really hard. I was an engineer, so I worked really hard to fit into a man's world and into a business world. I actually was just at a Women in Tech conference a couple of months ago in Salt Lake, and one of the younger women, she's like, "You're old, you have wisdom," but she's like, "Tell me how I fit into a man's world and how I become more like the men." And I said, "Oh, that's not the answer." I said, "I spent my whole life betraying who I was as a woman and my skills and talents and abilities as a woman, trying to fit into a man's world. And it took me until I was 55 to realize that that wasn't the right way to do it." And I have such a strong testimony of how important our feminine traits are and how important the whole family proclamation is. I mean, I'm like the antithesis of all those things, as going through my career and in my family. But I think because of that, I really understand and know how important it is to still embrace all those those feminine attributes and skills and gifts and talents that we have and use them in business and not try to be like the men. And that we have to learn to value men in the same way. And I think we're so off kilter in those regards now. It just breaks my heart. But
it's synergy. We need each other. There's just, I did a lot of research in my postdoctoral work and just did a number of interviews of women and men, and women do have a unique way of leading and a unique way of business. There is a difference. I know there's a lot of research and there are a lot of scholars who try to teach that there is not really a difference between women and men, and I just laugh at it. Like I've done enough of my own research to know that is just simply, it's very obvious. It's extremely obvious, and obviously the teachings of the prophets. Women have a unique way of leading, and frankly, we are seeing more and more research that's just showing how important it is to lead as a woman the way a woman needs to lead. Where sometimes research says, sometimes we're more circular, we're more social, we're more of a spider web type integration than a man being typically a little more hierarchical. Now that's I hate putting people in camps, right? But at the same time, how beautiful it is when the two merge. I remember doing an interview with, again, back to Sherry Dew, and I just said, give me some tips about women and leadership. And I remember her saying, one of the greatest, most important things you can do is make sure that you use both women and men in making decisions, that you counsel together with everyone. Like, synergy is so important. But I'm so grateful for women who lead as women.
yes,
and use the gifts and talents that women have, and for men who lead as men, and that we really do recognize that we forge ahead when we are united together.
Sounds fantastic. And so tell us, getting married at 40, what was that like? So there's a story there, isn't there?
Okay. I just, Dustin and I met when we were both 35. He's a couple months older than I am. So I just turned 50, and I finally, we had these 2 months where I'm the younger one, and I just live it up for 2 months every time. We met, and right after we met, my mom found out she had cancer. Then his mom found out she had cancer, and it was a little bit rocky at the beginning. My mom passed away from brain cancer, and his mom passed away from lung cancer. And we both had pretty thick walls up. I mean, not just a little bit, but quite thick. His was thicker than mine for a while, and then mine became thicker than his, and then his became like a little bit back and forth. We both had dated enough. We both had serious relationships enough, and we both had felt hurt enough. I remember coming home from maybe my first date with Dustin, and my dad just asking me, how it went. I was just sitting there, and I said it went really well. I tried my best not to talk too much about any of my dating life with them. And my dad said, well, are you going to go on a date again with him? And I said, no. And he said, well, I thought it went well. And I said, it did. It went great. And, well, why aren't you going to go out with him again? Did something happen? Is he not going to ask you out? And I said, no, I just don't want to get hurt anymore. And I'm just done. And I liked him. And so I already know how this ends. So no, we're not going out anymore. I mean, I was just like, great that we had a good time. I hope he has a great wife in the future. I wish him the best. Like I'm done dating, but it was sure fun. Remember my dad just saying to me, can you imagine if the Savior said that? Like, it's too hard, so I'm not gonna fulfill the atonement of Jesus Christ. It's just too hard. I know how this ends. Can you imagine if the Savior said that? And I just looked at my dad like, really? Here's the lecture? Like, you got married when you were 25. Mom was 20. Don't go there with me. But at the same time, I knew the principle that he was teaching was true. So we dated, but it was hard. We dated back and forth, broke up more times than we should have. He proposed, and I said yes. And he was dealing with some anxiety. And next thing I knew, he was on the other side of the country, or maybe the world. I don't know. I mean, it was the next day and I couldn't find him. We're engaged and I don't even know where you are. It was crazy. Anyway, so
I love it. It's just because Because I've listened to others talk, and that's, as you said, once you've got to a certain age, you've got like, I don't want to make any more mistakes.
So much fear and anxiety.
So much. I mean, I remember there was a point where I knew that it was the right thing. Like, and I hadn't felt that way before. To be very frank, I had dated a lot. I never felt right about any person I married, which some people just say you can marry any. I mean, I know we're even quoting the prophets. I mean, I do this as religious. I teach the eternal family class. And two men, a good man, a good woman, anybody can make it together. But I tell my students that, yeah, any good righteous man, any good righteous woman could make it happen. It doesn't mean you should. It doesn't even mean that you want to. But yeah, you're right. I mean, anybody could. I never found anybody that I actually felt a confirmation for, and nobody that I actually really wanted to be married to. So, I mean, I guess that's true. I can see that that's true. And I can see in most cases, I could see that could happen, but it didn't happen like that in mine. It just was not right. And I never felt good about it until Dustin. So there was a point, I remember writing him a letter and just saying, look, I know that because we talked about it. And I didn't realize at that time he was dealing with some pretty serious anxiety. And I just said, it's like I said, it's like I am the gift and I'm around the corner. And all you have to do is go around the corner and open up your gift, but you're refusing to go around the corner. But I'm right here. And then I said, but at the same time, the Lord's not going to let me just sit here forever. So at some point, the gift is going to be gone. And it was about that point that I moved to Boston. And the gift was gone. Like, I was planning on moving and we were done. And then he flew out to Boston. And actually I was really bugged because he flew out to Boston. We were completely broken up. He had proposed and broken up the engagement, and it was just a disaster. And I was just so frustrated with everything. And I for sure thought my husband's going to be maybe he'll be in Boston. I don't know. And if not, great, I'm going to have a great year or 2 or 5 or 10, or maybe I was going to die there. I don't know. But he came out, he went up in front of all of the students. There were probably 200 students there in this institute building there. And he kissed me, and I just about came unglued. I was like, you little. But long story short, I dated while I was in Boston. And at the end of our time in Boston, my stake president gave me a temple recommend. It was a live temple recommend. And he said, I just feel like when you go home, you need to have a live temple recommend so you don't have to ask anybody. And you can just get married as soon as you want to. And so I came home, and Dustin and I got married 3 weeks later.
Oh, wow.
He proposed and we got married. And when we were in,
you thought you'd better grab him before he changes his mind again.
And you know what? When he proposed, I was like, I actually told him beforehand, because he'd already broken off an engagement. I said, here's the deal. You plan the engagement, you plan the reception. Both of our parents had passed away at this point. So, I mean, it was like, this is horrible, but I tell my students that one of the easiest ways to get married is to make sure your parents die before you get married. Then you just, I mean, makes planning the wedding a lot easier, right? You have to pay for your own, but it still makes
20-year-old students don't understand.
Yeah, they don't understand. But we did miss our mothers for sure. Our fathers were still alive. Our mothers had both passed at that point. But yeah, I just said, you need to plan the whole reception. Like, I just said, I've already been hurt too bad. My wall's already thick. So if you're going to propose again, you just need to know I'm not doing anything except for showing up to the wedding. And that's what happened. I just showed up to the wedding, and he planned everything else. And I gave him some opinions, but honestly, I didn't really care very much. My parents eloped. I could have eloped, it wasn't, but we ended up getting married, and we had a fantastic reception, and people were thrilled and excited, and we were thrilled and excited, and then we took off. Yep. It was great. Yeah. But our dating was very hard.
And that's years. Like, you're talking more than 5 years.
We were 5 years of dating.
And during that time, I'm sure there was, because we have recently just interviewed a couple of people that have kind of, broken down or said, the hardest thing. Well, one said, I got to 36 and I was crying in the therapist's office, realizing I might not have a family. I might not have children. And then she said, I got over that. And just recently I went through it again because I realized I'm not going to have grandchildren. And it's just, I can't even imagine, the heartache that and the worry, you know, of those years. But
Well, and some of it is the family. Like both Dustin's in my family, especially because Dustin was the one, I'm getting really personal, but he's used to being run under the bus. So I you know, his mom, she would be so frustrated with him. She would call me and just say, "Why are you dating him? Why are you not letting him go? Like, what's your deal?" You know? And I just would say, I just know it's right. Like, I don't know what else to say, but right now I just know it's right. And if it's wrong, I'll stop. But right now it's right. So I'm 4 years in and somehow I'm still dating him. And
wow.
like I said, we broke up as much as we were together, I think. So, but it just kept going. But the hard part was how many people had opinions about that we should have been broken up and that I shouldn't continue him, and what a jerk he was that he proposed and then broke up with me. And even my siblings, there was a moment when my dad was just so done. I mean, my parents loved Dustin, and my mom didn't know him very well before she passed, but my dad had a lot of love for him, but he was extremely frustrated with him. And I remember one day him just being so done, and he just said, "You need to be done. You need to be done. You're 5 years into this. At this point, you could have married somebody else. You could have already started a family. You could have had children." And my response to him was, "No, I couldn't have, because I haven't met anybody else. Like, I know what it's like. There's nobody else there." But I appreciate, and I really cared a lot about my dad's feelings at this time. Like, I just said, "Okay, but can I have a blessing?" And he gave me a blessing, and the blessing said something to the effect of, um, which I told you about the previous blessing, but in this case, it was just, "The Lord desires that you continue to be patient with Dustin, and that in the future you will find that the Lord will give you guidance and understanding completely, and he desires that you trust him regardless of anyone else at this time in your life." And we were done with the blessing. My dad said, "The Lord has spoken. I'm so sorry. My opinion got in the way of the Spirit. Please follow the Lord and ignore me." And I
Yeah,
just
that would have been hard because your father's like being the
Wow.
spokesperson saying exactly the opposite to what he just
was
said.
the opposite of what the blessing.
Power of a priesthood blessing, huh?
Yep. Yeah. And at that point, that was when my dad changed it. He was just like, "Look, there's something going on between you and Dustin and the Lord, and I don't know what it is, but clearly my opinion doesn't matter anymore. You're beyond that." So
That's
it mattered
beautiful.
in some things, but I just, regardless of Dustin and I getting married, I knew we should have continued to date. And at some point, it would have been on him if we didn't get married in some ways. But I knew, as far as I was concerned, that I was following the Spirit, even though it seemed different than everybody else was thinking. I think they thought I was desperate or mental or something, but I just knew I was following the Spirit. So I did.
Yeah, 5 years is a very long time between 35 and 40. It's like,
It is.
it's
Yeah.
And I think from my dad's point, he was just seeing
yeah.
35 to 40 for a woman is an extremely important time,
Mm.
as far as having children and things. And frankly, he was right. We couldn't have children after we got married. We couldn't have children of our own. We have two beautiful girls that we adopted, and I have no question again that was part of the Lord's timing.
Mhm.
I would have loved to be able to have these children of my own. I don't know how that works in the eternities. I mean, I'm pretty sure I know how that works. I don't know why we didn't have children. I don't know why the timing. I don't understand, but I do know that these are my girls, our girls. And I know that they are, in fact, I know I'm probably blasting my mouth too much, but I'll just tell you this quick, kind of a funny story to me. Funny and sacred. When Dustin and I were dating, it was almost at the beginning of our dating, Dustin asked me if I were to marry any person from another culture, who would it be? And honestly, I was like, like, he's white, Spanish Fork, Utah. Why would you ask that
You're
question?
setting me up for something.
Yes, especially for someone who already had a pretty thick wall. Like, so what are you saying? We're breaking up? Like, it was like, anyway, but I answered. I said I'd marry a Samoan. I went to BYU Hawaii. I just thought Samoan men were very handsome, and I'd marry a Samoan. And I asked him the same question. He said Brazilian. He had served his mission in Brazil, and he thought Brazilian women were beautiful. For a period of time, right after we were married, we knew we couldn't have children. We tried everything under the sun, the IVF, and more money and more medication than any human should deal with, I think. And then nothing worked. And then we started looking at egg donations. Again, nothing. It was a very difficult time. But
Mm.
we were looking at egg donations. Dustin kept looking for Brazilian women. And I was like, no, like, it's just so buggy. But then when we had these girls and we had brought them into our family, we hadn't adopted them yet. I asked the person, who had their information. I just said, can you tell me a little bit about their ethnicity? And she said they're half Brazilian, half Samoan. And I about died. Like,
That is,
are you kidding me, right? But you can't make that up. Like, there's like how many people in this world are half Brazilian, half Samoan? And but Beth and I always laugh. We got the perfect combination. If we had had the choice, this is the choice we would have had, but it would have been impossible for us to make it. So we got what we actually wanted. But I just give that to the Lord. Like, I think there's a sense of humor there, but maybe a little bit spiritual too, like confirmation, you know?
Yeah, I have such a strong testimony that our Heavenly Father is always orchestrating, and we just don't
Yes.
know what's going on in the
he
background.
does have a sense of humor. He does do like, yeah,
Yes. Sometimes you're like, that's great.
yeah.
Yep.
I just want to talk quickly about sealing, like the sealing power, and especially being single and how that works.
What question exactly? Like,
I don't know what
there's a lot
question.
about sealing.
So for women who are feeling like they don't really belong to the church because they've missed out on the opportunity to be sealed.
Well, I'll tell you what I always say, Barbara, is who cares about the husband? But I'm not sealed to my Heavenly Father, and that bothers me.
Oh, but you are, because you're making and keeping covenants already.
Yeah. So
I don't mean to minimize that. That feeling is very real and it's hurtful, right? You know, when President Nelson was talking about his granddaughter and she had lost her husband, or she had lost her father, and then he has that comment that I think many people could easily be offended by, but he says, you're thinking myopically, right? We have to think eternally. We have to. Even right now, we have to, with my life, with my girls, my family. And I'm going to be very frank. People would say to me a number of times, like, don't say things like that to people because it's hurtful. It wasn't hurtful for me. It never has been hurtful for me. And I may be the exception to this with people. Why wasn't it hurtful? Because the doctrine of Jesus Christ is my foundation. Christ is my foundation. And I think and I'm going to be very bold here. Yes, mortality has hard parts. It has hard parts married. It has hard parts with my children. It is difficult with the death of my parents. Being single is not the hardest thing I've ever gone through. It's just not. Life was meant to be a test. The Lord says that He is proving us to see if we are faithful. We should expect hard times. We should expect lonely days, months, years in our lives. More than half of the members of the church are single. We're not in this alone. The sealing power of God is an eternal principle. And as Elder Uchtdorf has said recently, we need to learn to keep the ideal in mind while we live a real life. And I hope I'm not being insensitive to this. When people would say things like, don't talk about eternal families with people that are single, I would say the opposite. I would say it gives me so much hope to know that there is an eternal family in my future. I was raised by parents who taught me in fact, Santa Claus would bring documents in our stockings, not candy sometimes, documents, letters from Santa that would say, choose to not be offended, choose to not be negative, choose to focus on Jesus Christ and his atonement. Santa Claus would give those to us in our stockings. And I have learned sometimes in our desire to be sensitive to each other, we may not be giving hope. If I'm not talking about eternal life, if I'm not talking about the prospect of having an eternal family, an eternal husband, eternal children, it sounds like I mean, yeah, I can say that now because I'm married. No, I said that and I believed it and I lived by it when I was single. I am grateful for people who are willing to talk to me about how wonderful it was to be sealed. I'm grateful for people who were willing to talk to me about someday I would have a family of my own. I never took offense to that. I was extremely grateful for my 12 brothers and sisters who were all married and all had children and who didn't not talk to me about it because I was single. I'm grateful that they continued to live a true and honest life and they included me as if I was married, included me as if I had my family. I was an aunt to those nephews and nieces, and I continue to be. I was just part of the family. But I personally think we have to be very careful if we are too sensitive to eternal topics that people are afraid to talk to us about it because they might offend us. For me personally, and I know that this could just be me, Barbara Morgan Gardner. For me personally, I always want to talk doctrine and I want to talk truth that's eternal. So for me personally, I say I recognize it can be hard. It is still hard for me today that I have not had children, given birth to children of my own. It's hard. But I'm still going to talk about it. I still have a daughter's name in my head that I didn't give to my two daughters. I still know that there are other children that I don't have yet. And I know that I'm going to have them in the eternities. I know I will. In fact, it makes me less hopeful if I don't talk about the eternities. It makes me more sad if I don't think of the eternal future. I believe that that's also true with being single, being divorced, any reason for any of that. I hope we don't shy away from eternal truths.
Yeah. And
But at the same time, be sensitive. At the same time, be very sensitive.
Yes. And I have to say, I don't mean to be insensitive by my comment about who cares about the man, because obviously I do.
No,
You know what I mean is because I really believe in that partnership and that relationship. And so I would hate to come across as being insensitive about that part.
You know, Kim, one of the things that I am becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger proponent of in my life is that we focus on the patriarchal order of the priesthood, the family order of the priesthood. And I recognize the term patriarchal can be negative to some people. And I think that's also due to a misunderstanding of what the patriarchal order is and what family order is and what God means when Adam, the patriarchal order only exists with Eve and Adam or with Sarah and Abraham. There is no patriarchal order without a woman and a man. And that's also an eternal perspective. It's a James E. Talmage saying, now or in the future, you're going to be sealed. And so you have that sealing. It's the law of compensation. You have those blessings. You are living your covenants right now, Kim and Kay and anyone else that's listening, and you have the law of compensation that gives you the priesthood power and authority and the sealing opportunities and the relationship with your Father in heaven if you are keeping your temple covenants. You don't have to wait until you're married to receive the blessings that are associated with the patriarchal order of the priesthood if you're living your covenants now, because the patriarchal order of the priesthood is an eternal order, right? So if we're focusing on what we don't have as members of the church, that may be impeding us understanding what we really do have as eternal beings, as eternal women and men, and eternal families.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That is good. And so I think we're going to have to finish there. I have 20 million questions I'd love to ask you, but
we could keep you for hours.
We can do this again sometime. I know I've been blasting my mouth, but it's been so fun just talking with you guys.
No, I think it's going to help a lot of the singles and really give them a different perspective, and I love that. So
thank you for sharing that part of your story, and the heartfeltness of it. And thank you, Kim, for being part of it today too.
Okay, can I just say this? I hope this is going to sound very like almost naive. I wish I'm going to say, because I was the 12th child and I had siblings that got married older and I had parents that eloped to the temple, I think I was raised in a different perspective. Both of my dad's parents were very anti-Mormon. My grandmother took her own life. My grandfather hated the church. My mother was coming from a mother who had left the church years before, and my parents fought for the church. They fought to be a family. And there was very little social influence on them. They paid the price to know the gospel, and they taught us and treated us and made sure as much as they could to understand that we were living our lives according to the doctrine and the principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ and not according to what society was teaching. And I am very grateful to know when I was growing up that my marital status wasn't nearly as important as my covenant relationship with the Lord. And my parents did not treat me any differently whether I was married or single, than any other of my siblings. We were all righteous, as far as they were concerned. We were all good kids. We were trying to do our best. There was no, like, Barb, you're the single one, so something's wrong. I never felt that from them. I never felt like any blessing was being withheld. My parents wanted the best for me, and I think they knew I wanted to have a family, so they hurt for me that I couldn't. But it was never a less than. It was just simply a matter of timing. It was just a simple matter of just trust in the Lord, have faith, keep going. And I say this because I wish every woman and man, especially who's single in the church, and I wish every member of the church who was married would understand this. It's between you and the Lord, and you just keep your covenants, and you really are going to be okay. And you are doing the right thing, and you are just as important. And we need you desperately. I need you. I need every single woman and man in this church to step up to the plate and keep their covenants and set an example for me. I need you in my life. Like Kim and Kay, I need you in my life. Your marital status doesn't make a beans of difference to me. It just doesn't. You matter to me. You matter to the Lord. Who you are right now in your life matters. And someday, if you're married, great, you'll matter to me then. Just as much, no more, no less. I just wish that we could just take the whole marital status out sometimes and recognize that when it happens, and that's great. But as far as ceilings in the temple, or as far as importance of one individual or another, it doesn't matter. We are all sons and daughters of God. It's our identity. He doesn't say we're married to sons and daughters of God. We are sons and daughters of God. Anyway, that's it. Here's my Jane. Do you want to meet my daughter?
Yes.
Yep.
Here she
Love
is.
to.
Hi, Jane. Say hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
It's nice
She's
to
a
meet
crazy woman.
you.
This is Kim, and this is Kay. Kay lives in Australia.
Yeah, the other side of the world. I talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Listen to Kay. Kay, will you say hi to Jane? We can hear your accent.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, it's Jane.
Jane?
Jane. Her name is Jane Elaine.
Jane Elaine. Okay.
Yep.
I probably say that different, Elaine.
Yep. That's my middle name as well. Jane Elaine.
I love that.
Yep. Anyway. Ladies, I love you. Thank you for this conversation together. You've helped me to think through some things as well.
Oh,
we
thank
really
you.
appreciate
We love you.
All right, we'll let you go. Thank you.
Take
Yes.
care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, ladies. Church is true.